today's topic and kind of topic for the tech talk is storytelling and design. And yeah, I think more than just the design aspect, I think we're going to focus today on understanding how just telling stories in our different fields we are operating in, being as a designer, a software engineer, a data scientist, how storytelling can be super effective in communicating your ideas and what you're envisioning, and at the same time also being able to understand what your customer, what your client wants. So I'll kind of kick off with the agenda we have. I'm going to start with some stories we know and just have an interactive kind of discussion on what we feel about it, what we can recall. And then I'll jump into talking about why is storytelling useful, a little bit more in depth, and then talk about the 7 habits for being a highly effective storyteller. And then we'll wrap up with just some key points, key learnings we've gotten, and then we can open up for questions. So how many people in the call right now are familiar with this book?
I am. I remember when I first received it in 5th grade.
And is there any, when I show this image to you, does it kind of like, bring a rush of memories? Do you kind of recall the whole stories, the character, the environment, the location?
Yeah, to some degree, I would say. I mean, not to, hyper detail, but also because I'm not like a huge Potterhead. I enjoyed the novels, but yeah, the premise I definitely remember. I remember the characters. Like I can close my eyes and picture them.
All right. Anybody else?
I think it's a pretty big part of my generation as well to have read the Harry Potter books. So yeah.
And do we have like some kind of feeling that we get immediately after seeing this? Do we recall like, hey, I remember, I was doing this, doing that, just because of the
story? Remember a lot of details, and also it kind of brings some memories back of my own childhood. So I like to sometimes read them over again and go through the story again. So yeah. And I'll ask this question to everybody before we move on to the next. Do we feel like we see some part of ourselves in these characters, the story, to some degree? It's a yes or no question. I think
I would say, yeah, I agree. It's very relatable.
All right, so clearly you're resonating based on this, story of Harry Potter. It's a fictional story, but the journey, the character, the emotion behind it, we clearly are able to connect it with our own lives and see, to kind of just recall the memories, the characters and everything behind it. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. How many people are familiar with this film?
I would say pretty much everyone, I assume.
Does everybody know the story?
I haven't ever watched the movie, but I think most people know the story, or at least have heard about it.
That's a very interesting point to bring up, that you haven't watched the movie, but you know the story behind it. And I kind of want us to kind of go a little bit deeper on that. It's very interesting that, these stories, it's the basis of the story is kind of like the Romeo and Juliet foundation, but it has been kind of, this is existing idea, but made a little bit more original with interesting characters and putting in conflict. The conflict being the ship. You can clearly see in the poster, the ship is where the positive happens and the negative, and it's the vehicle, kind of literally the vehicle which kind of builds their relationships and breaks it, or something to that degree. Do we have any comments on this? Any thoughts? If not, we can.
Nothing in particular.
Okay. And then finally, how many people are familiar with this image, the screenshot? Do we know the story, the characters around it?
Super Mario.
Super Mario, right?
Classic.
It's a classic, right? And And even to this day, so I showed this, image, and even to this day, you can see that this character still persists. The story still remains the same. The conflicts still remain the same, but why does it keep on persisting? Why do people still enjoy it? And that's kind of the going to be the basis of the topic of how do we create these effective stories, these stories that persist and leave a long-lasting impression in our minds, and and it be associated with positive memories. How have they effectively done this, and how can we use this as a software company to leverage and serve our clients and customers better? So I want to share this quote by Steve Jobs: "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come." And we can see that even Steve Jobs kind of walked the walk and has done that with his ability and his mindset to create products which customers want. So why is storytelling useful? Well, I kind of came up with kind of like 3 reasons. I think it's going to be super useful for us. First off is to communicate effectively with our peers, our other software engineers, other designers. The second audience I think it's super useful to have stories as clients, customers, and then the executive and board. And you can see this kind of gradation, or we're going from super specific or very close connected audience to a high level audience. And we learn how this is super important to know who we're communicating with and how we reframe the story or modulate the story to best communicate the core essence that we're trying to say. The second reason is to understand experiences in the following levels. So visceral being, on a visual level, what we're seeing. Then behavioral is how the customer is interacting with it, and kind of capturing how they are interacting, what kind of emotional response they're having while they're doing the task. And then finally, reflective. This is after the user has successfully completed the task or the goal they're trying to achieve, and then post task, how are they remembering this? What is their the final impression they've had? And then finally, the prime reason is to kind of effectively empathize with our customer and with the client and with our peers. These stories, which we can craft when we're working on a project, with regards to the client, with regards to the client's project that we're making, the customers, the end users that are involved, that's where storytelling can play a huge role in making sure we're communicating effectively to create a really good product or a really good experience. So I'll share one more quote. Success is the product of daily habits, not once in a lifetime transformations. This is a quote by James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. And I'm sharing this quote just because we can understand that, okay, we might not all be, effective storytellers yet. It might not be our strong suit, but, making sure we have that mindset, like this is a muscle we're slowly trying to develop, and not everybody is going to be the greatest storyteller immediately. It's something we're going to hone in and practice on. So with that we're going to move into the 7 habits of highly effective storytellers. So this is kind of based on an EX-PIXAR director, Emma Cope, and she made these 22 story rules, and she literally made them. She went on Twitter and just started tweeting out these rules that she uses to make sure she can craft effective, effective emotional stories. And I'm sure you guys have watched Finding Nemo, Incredibles, all these Pixar movies, and we can see how, people have a very strong emotional response and why those movies are super successful. So from those 22 story rules, I've kind of picked out seven habits, 7 kind of principles that we should kind of, use in order to be kind of successful and serve our clients and customers better. So the first one is start with why. So the principle or the rule, which is from Emma Coates' 22 story rules, is why must you tell this story? What's the belief burning within you that your story feeds off of? That's the heart of it. So in our kind of like software environment, we kind of often jump straight to the solution. We start crafting user stories, journey maps, but the critical question, why? What's the purpose behind the user stories we're making? What's the purpose behind the feature? Why does our user actually want it? So an example to kind of get our gears turning is, does our user or does the customer want a 1/4 inch drill, or do they want to have a 1/4 inch hole? So the point that this example is trying to illustrate is, the user kind of really just cares about the output. They care about what they're looking to get done. The medium or the tool or the process plays a slightly minor role compared to the output. And that's kind of where we want to understand why the user needs to be able to do something, not just, they don't want the drill, they want the actual output or the whole. So understanding that is super essential when crafting a story. So the second habit to develop is knowing the struggle. And this is based on the rule, you admire a character for trying more than for their successes. So empathy is essential in creating value for the client, and knowing what's going on their end is super important. If you put an effort to understand how they're operating, what their processes are, what their behaviors are, what their tendencies are, you can kind of craft better stories in order to communicate what you're working on, what you've done so far, to make sure your message gets through to them in their unique language. So kind of the idea here is, the example is, think of yourself, being in a watching a play where the audience is the engineers, the software engineers, the team, the designers, the data scientists, and the play itself, the characters are the clients, the customers, the end users. And if we can understand their emotions, what's happening, how their repetitive tasks are being played out, what is exactly happening, we can, from our end, as a team, from the audience, and empathize with them, and even go an extra mile and understand the deeper level emotion towards what's happening. So making an effort to understand the drama and then sharing it and making effective user stories around those can help develop a final product which is more impactful for the client. The third habit is knowing the stakes. So this is based on the rule of, what are the stakes? Give us a reason to root for the character. What happens if they don't succeed? Stack the odds against. So basically, in this is the key is to understand, why should we care for the characters in the play? Why should we care for the protagonist? And the reason is, if we are saying you're customer obsessed and customer success oriented, what is the impact the characters are going to have, the end users are going to have, if they can't do their job properly? So what is going to happen if we give them a product and it doesn't work? What is the impact? Are they going to lose millions? Are they going to break a leg? What is the impact? So thinking from that vantage point and developing kind of those muscles to see from that perspective is super crucial to ensure we are understanding why the client is asking for what they want. The fourth habit is to create credibility. So this is based on the rule of, if you were the character and in this situation, how would you feel? Honesty lends credibility to unbelievable situations. So there tends to be a whole lot of noise when a project starts, or in any project. And noise, I mean, the customers, the end users are saying something, the client is saying something that they want, the team is saying that we should do this, we shouldn't do this. And And it's super crucial at this time to kind of establish a collective hypothesis, and then making sure we can validate those hypotheses. And being able to validate those means conducting, user interviews, doing research, and being highly obsessed behind that. It is very easy to kind of not, kind of just, while, you do the hypothesis and you just execute. But validating, which means, understanding the pain points and speaking with the customer, speaking with the client directly and asking direct questions can really be effective in aligning what is supposed to happen and what is not supposed to happen. And then the fifth habit is thinking from start, middle, and end. And this is based on the rule. This is kind of a template which Emma Code has made. It's basically once upon a time there was a character. Every day they would do something. One day they found something new or discovered something new. Because of that, they got X benefit. Because of that, they got another benefit until finally they transformed. So this is kind of the template for creating a user story or a journey behind a problem or which we're trying to solve. And a good story usually has a very good middle phase and a well-defined structure. And having this kind of mindset of thinking from start, middle, and end, and how they're leaving, how the customer is leaving, is super useful in making a good product. And knowing how to visualize this in this manner, also you can write effective user stories which are really aligned with what is happening on the ground level. And there's in a way to communicate effectively, there's a method called tell, show, tell method. This is a common sales method that is used, but basically the premise is that you kind of tell your, the client, the customer, whoever you're presenting your thoughts to, you tell them you understand your user and what the user needs and wants to get done. Then you show them and present and demo what is happening. You present features which are within a product. Let's go with an example of a product. You present and demo the features to show kind of what's actually happening. And then again, you reiterate and come back to the initial point of these are the user needs and these are the goals, and to tell them why they should care about what just happened. So this tell, show, tell method is super useful in communicating, and a big key aspect is the show aspect. I believe a lot of us can get stuck in just telling and not communicating visually, and we all know that we're visual creatures. If you just talk, it doesn't leave an impression. So showing, demoing, displaying, even and this doesn't have to be a full-blown mock-up prototype. This is the actual final product, but rather it's a sketch. It's just a wireframe. It's just a basic prototype which has done the basic code. Whatever is whatever is fully closed in a closed loop that can be displayed should be shown. And this requires practice. Again, we all want to make the best thing on the first go, but the real magic happens in the rework. And then the sixth habit is to innovate. So kind of innovate in the sense of, let's say we're making a product which is going to have it's a traditional dashboard, but we don't want to just kind of like create the same thing again. No one likes hearing the exact same story again and again. So the question comes is, how do we make it original? And to make it original, it's about getting super specific and understanding the client and the customers who they're looking to serve really, really well. And the kind of principle which Emma Code has shown from her 22 story rules is discount the first thing that comes to mind, and the second, the third, fourth, fifth. Get the obvious out of the way, surprise yourself. So the kind of idea being shown here is don't marry to your first idea. Kind of go one step deeper. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If there's a tendency to kind of, you got the idea, it works, and to move along with it. But if you stick with it a little bit longer, think from the vantage point of the client and the customer's objectives a little bit deeper, and the mission and the vision, there's a good opportunity to innovate. And then finally, the last habit to develop to be an effective storyteller is start with the end. And this is kind of based on the principle of come with your ending before you figure out your middle. Seriously, endings are hard. Get yours working up front. So the context example I can give is, a product has been built, shipped, released, it's out there, but what's happening with it right now? Is it successful? Are the customers liking it? How are they feeling about it? Is the business getting the key results they're looking for? Are they making the revenue they want? So asking these questions in account and having a plan for answering these questions can be super useful to kind of validate and anticipate and know your results. So the kind of key learning here is to know and anticipate your results way early in the process and early on in the project. So if you can get hyper specific, like, hey, this is what I want to get in terms of output, you can work backwards to crafting a plan which will yield those kind of results. But if those steps are not taken, you leave it to chance. So knowing your end, knowing the final goal, the destination, super as clear as possible, usually you will get those results then. So yeah, in summary, the big points that we covered today are the quarter-inch hole. Basically, start with the why. Understand, is it the tool, like the feature they really want? But the better question is, what do they want to do with that feature? Answering that can be super helpful. Then the second point is sharing the drama, understanding, what are the mechanics behind the customer and the client and the problem they're looking to solve. And if you can empathize with that, you can take one step further. Impress your client by creating something they didn't even know they wanted. And the third big learning is, what will our end users lose? What is at stake? If we don't do something, or if we kind of don't give it the due diligence to it, what is the impact that it's going to have? The fourth point is validating your hypothesis. This means doing the research, asking the questions early on, asking difficult questions, which both parties, the client and the team might not be comfortable, but asking the questions early on can be super helpful in modulating or changing your hypothesis to make sure the trajectory in the long term it aligns and doesn't create surprises for both parties again. Then the fifth point we covered today is the tell, show, tell method, where we tell the importance of what we have done, we show and display the practical usage of it, and then again we wrap it up by telling this is why it's important and why the customers are going to care for it. And then the sixth point is don't marry your first idea. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable and prying a little bit deeper in terms of making something unique or innovative, which is going to add value again to the customer, and they might have not even known if that they wanted this. And then finally, know and anticipate your results. Knowing the final destination usually allows you to craft a path. It makes crafting the path much easier and taking the right steps much easier. So that is kind of the seven highly effective habits for being an effective storyteller. And I have my references. I found out about most of this through Medium, about using rules of storytelling, and then how storytelling is super useful for creating a good UX. So thank you for listening. Any questions, comments, concerns, anything we want to challenge? We can open up for that now. Thank you.
Awesome. Well done, Jishnu. It's a good talk, and at least from my side, like kind of looking through those examples, in real time, I was mapping them to
learnings, let's put them that way, and challenges, and perhaps some bad decisions that at least I had personally made early on in my career, and kind of wish I'd come to these conclusions earlier. I'm curious to know, I mean, now that you've kind of almost done your first project, like which of the 7 kind of resonated most with you, and why?
So the big one which resonated with me was kind of knowing what's at stake, and also knowing the struggle. I think personally for me, with the project we were mentioning here, I don't think I truly empathized with what happened, and kind of it devolved into a relationship of client versus the team. We're just kind of like looking to get it done. They don't really understand what we're doing, and harboring and holding on to kind of negative emotions. So big learning again is kind of speaking and sitting down with the client early on and building a good working relationship at the very least, where we can communicate and talk about the challenges they're facing, and also creating, and once you have created a solid relationship, you can be comfortable to share the challenges we are facing in terms of development, in terms of the technical challenges we might be having. They might be more willing to understand those. If that has not been set up initially on, it creates a lot of pressure on the team side to be able to, they know that they can't give XYZ reason because the client is not going to listen. So it's a good investment to do early on, where you're kind of connecting, you're going to be good buddies with your client now, at least good professional working buddies at the very least. So that's kind of like my big learnings based on these habits.
Cool.
Could you show the 7 points again? They were.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were at the back. All right.
Yeah.
So what if? So first 2 points seem to be basically, well, the first 3 points, I guess, is understanding the client and their goal and why they're doing things. What if you're not convinced with what the client is trying to do? How do you go about that?
Then the first 3 steps haven't been done properly. Then now, if it's a question of, do you personally, like as a personal level, do you not agree with them, or is it on a professional level? If it's on a professional level, those steps can be, there needs to be more dialogue that needs to happen in discussion to make sure, at least from your vantage point, everything is communicated. And again, you do the tell, show, tell method. If it's something, if the client is asking for a feature, it doesn't make sense in a business standpoint from our vantage point, we, do the research, we show the stats, we communicate that. And even if let's say after that point, they say, okay, yeah, Malhar, that makes sense. Thank you for, setting this up and doing this. It's a win. But if they say, no, it's not, and they say like, we need to do this, and they don't reveal their reasons. At that point, we can say that we've done our part. At the end of the day, we want to make sure they get what they're looking for. At that point, we do our best to communicate and warn them that, hey, this trajectory you're going with is not ideal based on the information you have given. Again, it depends on the relationship that has been built, and not with every client. It's not going to be like we're best friends and telling me about every single thing. Usually, there is going to be some kind of informational arbitrage they're going to hold on to and not share, depending on what kind of project or relationship that there is to begin with. But to answer your question in short, if it's something you don't agree with, usually spending some more time to have a dialogue and discussion in a structured way will at least get clarity on how they're thinking. If they're completely shutting off and just operating based on their board or executive decisions, then you can at least get clarity on that and move with a clear conscience forward. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that clear. Thank you.
No problem. Any other thoughts? I would love to hear from like the different. I know we've heard from the CEO side, we've heard from the software engineer side. Would like to hear from the data science side, from the people operations side. If there's anything they resonated with, or they don't agree with, they want to challenge, I would love for us to kind of have a discussion.
Well, actually, I would have one comment. Personally, I wouldn't marry any idea, basically. I'm going to stick with probably an idea, but I would never marry an idea because probably it's going to change at one point.
Right,
That's my
right.
only comment.
I definitely agree with that. Yes, you shouldn't marry any of the ideas. You don't even marry the sixth or seventh idea. And having that kind of mindset definitely allows for flexibility. So I agree with that point.
Particularly important for data scientists too, I would say, right? I mean, you kind of let the data dictate which route you're going to take rather than get dogmatic about it.
Yeah, just use stuff that, make you survive at the point, but later, with time, things change, data change, you have more data, whatever, more different inputs. So I would never stick for an idea.
Definitely that. I mean, in one way, I'm thinking the data is your client in one way. They are ever changing and ever evolving in some depending on what you're trying to do with it. So being flexible is also a key way to address that.
Sure.
Yeah. I'll just add one more thing from my side is know the struggle. I think that one is, for me, it's a nicer, or let's say more visceral way of communicating empathy. That's at least how I read it. And yeah, to me, just a little point about how that just like it really strikes me as I don't know, somehow it's a more powerful way of saying, rather than just saying this ethereal thing where everybody's just like, yeah, yes, you need to be empathetic with everyone. It's like, know the struggle. Like, because it really is a struggle. And yeah, and I just think it's super important to understand where anybody is coming from, right? To be able to, as you said, to speak in terms that they'll understand and will resonate with them, depending on their specific context. And usually, in our context, when kind of clients come to us, ideally we're solving a problem for them. So by definition, they are going through some form of a struggle.
Yeah, definitely. Knowing the struggle is the point I also am heavily resonating with. And if a proper structured way or methods are established early on, before even starting a project, when at the beginning phases of a project, it can definitely again strengthen the relationship. And the second thing is, you get an opportunity to create something which the client didn't even know they wanted. They're not able to think. If in one way you're kind of synchronizing and adding to their mental bandwidth because you're aligned on thinking about the same problem. So knowing the struggle is a big one for me personally. I feel like if that can be done, you can do some good magic.
Yeah.
All right. Any final comments, questions, concerns, thoughts?
Jishnu, I think what I have to say kind of relates to the first few points, where I had to talk with Ahid this morning, and she talked about how much she appreciated the discovery period, I want to say, where you're given the time to like research the topic the client wanted and to really like delve into what needs to be done. And she's just telling me how helpful she found that, and I was wondering, would you say that kind of relates to what you had said in the beginning? I wasn't able to be here for that, but I'm just wondering, going through the 7 points.
Yeah. I mean, what Ahid, I'm assuming, is mentioning is the double diamond process, where the first part is you spend discovery, you're doing research, you're doing user interviews, you're creating personas. You're basically, trying to understand the client through a mix of passive and active exercises. And the kind of big point which I highlighted throughout the presentation is, it's very easy for us to gravitate towards doing passive actions or doing passive exercises, which usually tends to lead to a lot of assumptions. And yeah, there is definitely a lot of value if the discovery phase is done right. And again, if it's done right, you're going to be feeling uncomfortable throughout that process. And if you do it right once, the next project is going to get easier, and you will be able to move past that level or that kind of way of thinking of this is not comfortable, but rather you're going to be able to think on a higher level, like, okay, you can actually be very close to these principles of starting with the why, knowing the struggle, knowing the stakes. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lee.
I'm curious to know.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying because it was very interesting, and she really liked the time that they had to properly research the topics and just learn about them. Because from my understanding was that it's an ask you give the client, where I think it's time sensitive as well, so it just depends on their timeline. But you were saying,
I mean, I was going to just quickly before you one last point. Just like, yeah, velocity is a key thing. The discovery phase is something which is always kind of bottlenecked, just because of when we connect with the client, when the project is beginning, and also to what degree is the client aware of a good design process, a good development process. And the big point I want to say is the velocity. It's also your personal velocity and the velocity of the project. So if those can synchronize, it's either one has to be really fast or one is really slow, that kind of thing. But if you get a chance to do it in one project really well, you can figure out how to optimize it personally for yourself personally, and how to do those exercises in the discovery phase effectively.
right.
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask, you mentioned that, you talked a lot about discomfort in the earlier points, particularly, when it comes to, I would say, creating credibility through basically validating hypotheses, right? I get on one hand that it might be uncomfortable in that, you might have this initial assumption that might be rooted in whatever it might be. It might just have this belief that these type of projects should be executed in this way. But if you actually have a fair assessment, where test that hypothesis in a kind of very objective way, you might find that what you assumed initially and were quite sure about, actually the data is telling you otherwise. Is that what you're referring to as being uncomfortable in kind of discovery phase? Okay.
Yes. Yes and no. But with regards to creating credibility, yes, there can be discomfort to understanding it. But let me kind of take it back and let me give an example. Like an example that's coming to mind. Like if a company comes to PhazeRo and says, "Hey, we want to make this food delivery app. It's like Talabat, it's like that." In our head, we already are creating these definitions or visuals of like, okay, this is what the app is going to look like. And if we at that point stop and compromise on the start with the why, knowing the struggle, knowing what's at stake, and go into execution mode, because time is money. When we want to get it done fast, there's a good chance you're going to make something which the client didn't want, or the client got, but they're just it's satisfactory. You've not innovated.
They didn't love it.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, their customers are satisfied, but it's, the big point is, one of the points, I didn't mention this, but you want to transform customers to becoming an audience where the customers are not just like they passively like, yeah, I need to use it because it's there. Rather, they're their audience. They're up to date. They're like constantly waiting for what's the next thing that this company is going to do. we've basically gotten their attention rather than, you know, what's more valuable than, you know, getting their money is getting their attention and sticking with it. And that kind of will be possible only if we can truly understand them on a deeper level in terms of how they behave, how they operate, and what kind of, like, just understanding them as a person. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's at least for me, there's a lot to reflect on after this talk.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this definitely in making this presentation, I was like, oh man, I'm going to be talking about a lot of the stuff which I'm definitely not practicing myself. But I think the good mindset to have again is, you know, we're going to gradually build these muscles and start thinking and remind ourselves that, you know, this is the way to go about it. And if we can do it truly in a synchronous level there from all the different vantage points, you know, from the people operations, from the data science perspective, from the engineering perspective, from the business perspective, if we can, you know, align, you know, good things will happen for sure.
I almost feel like this should go into, like, you know, our project templates. I feel like this should be somewhere in the docs, just like as a visceral reminder to the team. I don't know what your thoughts are, Mahaf.
Yeah, 100%. I think it can go somewhere in Confluence, to be honest. You have to figure out a proper location where it doesn't get, you know, lost or anything like that. But 100%, this is something we need to constantly be thinking about. The goal is to become customer obsessed, right?
Yeah,
so this is
exactly.
a big part
Yeah,
of it.
the goal is to be customer obsessed, and we want to be able to provide the ways to be customer obsessed, like specific, definitive ways, where you can actually, like, hey, I'm in the mood to practice customer obsession, like, you know, and do it and see for yourself, like, the value you're getting out as a professional, you know, as a designer. If I actually put the work and then try out these exercises, this kind of mindset, and see the value that comes out of it. And the value is not going to be immediate. It's going to be kind of like 3-4 months, 1 year, 2 year, and you'll be like, pat yourself in the back, you know, for doing that. But yeah, in terms of where this, I can repurpose this as another, like a slide deck for new people and current people joining, where it's kind of focused on that with more bullets.
I even think it should be something that we review before every project.
Yes.
Just look through
Yeah.
this as a team. Yeah,
I
before
think,
a reminder.
Yep, and this can be something which we can you know, again, this is version 1 of this PowerPoint. We do version 2, we rework it, we get feedback like, yeah, at this point doesn't make sense to me. Because I think, again, if we practice these principles for even making this experience really good, of this, you know, this kind of these principles, and it makes sense to everybody in the company, that'll be a big win for us. If everybody in our company can understand, you know, hey, this is what we mean by knowing the stakes, and this is what it means to your in your own unique position. That would be super useful.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. So I guess we can wrap up then. Thank you very much, Jishnu. And I guess have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Jishnu.
That was really
Thank
good.
you guys. Thank you for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.